This is called DIY web development, and I don't really think that such thing as web development exists. It's like saying I'm a nuclear power station designer. It's too big a topic. But what I'm going to try and do is cover the entire topic sort of very, very quickly, and then concentrate on the bit that most people think of is web design. So that's, if I can find the right button, there we go. So if you're going to do a website, you have to consider everything from the bottom right the way to the top. So you need a server, hardware. It needs an operating system. You're going to have all these various bits and pieces. There might be databases, backup systems. You've got to be able to connect to this server. There's all sorts, so those are the support services. Then you have a web server which might have all sorts of plugins. Mod Perl, Ruby, Java, take your pick. All sorts of things going on there. Connections to databases, connections to other databases. That gets squirted over the internet, over HTTP. And then you've got the web browser at the other person's end. You can't control what the web browser is. And it's got all sorts of programming and things going on in there. So if you're going to do everything yourself, you have to consider you've got everything from the bottom right the way to the top. And the hardware bit's relatively easy. Pretty much any old PC will do. It's one of the nice things about websites. Websites are very easy to squirt out across the internet, so you just need a computer with reasonably modern hardware. The one thing you will notice is it helps to have good network connections, and good network connections cost money. That's probably the only thing you really need to worry about. And for the operating system, pretty much anything will do. Web servers will run on just about any kind of Unix you can think of. They even runs on Windows and mainframes and VAXs, and people have done weird things to very weird and wonderful computers, so there's no problem with the operating system. So the real thing is the network connection, which basically means the hosting. The simplest thing to do is you simply connect your computer to the internet and tell people to come and look at your computer using your Vox standard ADSL or cable network connection, and that will cost you nothing more than your existing internet connection. You can even do that on dial-up, which I have done a long time ago. You can do virtual hosting. Lots of people will take a server and serve many, many websites. Companies like GoDaddy are serving thousands of websites at a time, and that will cost you anything from nothing, some ISPs will give you that as a service, to a few pounds per month. You've also got virtual servers, VMware, UML are popular. Companies like Bytemark have been doing this for a number of years, and Zen's getting very trendy. So now you have a virtual server, so you're not sharing the web server, you're sharing a virtual server. You get more control, and it obviously costs you more money. And then you can actually take your server and stick it directly into the internet at some very expensive location like Telehouse in London, and you can pay an enormous amount of money, £1,000 a month.
They're getting cheaper. You can get them for as low as 50 quid a month.
Yeah, but it's more expensive than doing it yourself. So those you should have your hosting options. Now, self-hosting has the advantage that, well, it has no additional cost over your existing network connection on your computer, so it's essentially free. And if you know what you're doing, it's easy and it's secure. The disadvantages are that obviously most people have asymmetric DSL, so your upstream bandwidth is not very good, so you're not going to be running Google out of your PC in your loft. If you don't know what you're doing, it's hard, and it could be horribly, horribly insecure because it's your PC that's connected to the internet, and if some nasty little oik decides to attack it, it's your PC that gets compromised, not something nicely away that someone else is looking after. So it's not something I recommend as a beginner. Virtual hosting, it's virtually free. If you know what you're doing, again, it's easy and simple and secure. You don't obviously have full control because you're sharing the system resource, and if the hosting company is sloppy with their security, then your server will be sloppy. But it's all the balances as they come and go. Virtual server is virtually the same, but obviously you're paying a tiny bit more money and you get a tiny bit more control, and the same security versus insecurity balance takes place. And then obviously a fully hosted server, you've got a box. You can specify a very big box with lots and lots of disk and backup, and you can specify complex and sophisticated security. The big disadvantage with the fully hosted solution usually is it costs money, which if you're a small club or a private citizen, it's probably not what you're going to pay for. But if you're a company, you happily spend £1,000 a month on a fully hosted server. So I would recommend that if you want to build a website, you can run it on your own PC at home, but don't connect it to the internet. It's relatively safe and secure, and you can play to your heart's content. Your great aunt in Australia isn't going to be able to see it, but for the purposes of testing, it's a very sensible strategy. And your best bet is you can probably get free space either at your ISP or on someone else within the local might have some space to arrange, and then put that away from your home network. So you can develop at home, test and play to your heart's content. You're not going to, no little script kid is going to compromise your machine because it's not connected to the internet. And then when you're happy, copy your files to somewhere else. And that's probably the best strategy for building websites. So you've got lots and lots of web servers to choose from. All sorts of advantages and disadvantages. Most distros you can just simply go aptitude install whatever you want, or whatever the SUSE or Red Hat equivalent is. They're fairly straightforward. I would suggest Apache. It's not strictly speaking the best web server. It's not the fastest, but it is very, very well known, and it's a very good overall compromise. You can go into bookshops and buy books. There's tons of documentation on the internet. It's good enough at everything it does, and the fact it's well documented means you're more likely to get help if you have any problems. So you go off, you install Apache. All the web server does is it converts an entry in the bar in the browser, the request, to a physical place on your file system. So here, if you go to HTTP, whatever your server is, without any specification, there's a good chance it'll simply go to var www htdocs or whatever the default is. So if there's a file here called foo and you request the file foo, all the Apache server does is it goes there, finds it, and squirts it back. It's a very, very simple mapping process. Web servers at their simplest basically take a request, go find the file. If they can't find the file, they send an error. If they do find the file, they just send the file. It's a very, very simple process. So all you need to do is create the bits. So you've got the classic things. You've got web pages, style sheets and scripts. They're plain text files. They're easy to deal with. You can use a text editor. Then there's graphics. Well, I'm useless at graphics, so I don't have graphics on my website. You can stick Java, you can put animation, movies and various things. These are binaries and they require specific tools to deal with. You can have a perfectly good website with no graphics, no Java, no animation, no movies, virtually no scripts, and it's just got text. So life is easy. So the tools you'll need, well, there's lots and lots of them, and you can spend an enormous amount of money or nothing at all. You've got what you see is what you get tools. They try to treat web pages the way that Microsoft Word treats a Word document. And the famous one is Dreamweaver, which you can spend a lot of money for. And then there's Front Page. And as many people say, friends don't like friends use Front Page. Because Front Page produces the most diabolical web pages you've ever had the misfortune to use. And it's incredibly difficult 6 months later to add something to them or change something to them. You can only use Front Page to edit Front Page web pages. They're notorious for actually not rendering properly as well. Nuvu is the spin-off from the Mozilla project, and it's free, widely available, Linux, Mac, Windows. The Dreamweaver and Front Page obviously only run on Windows. I think Dreamweaver may still run on a Mac. I don't recommend them for anything other than a quick mock-up, because it's actually very difficult to get the web page you actually want. You can get 90% of the way there, but that last 10% is so painful to get. It's unbelievably difficult. I would recommend a sort of the intermediate tier. Tools like Bluefish, Quanta, HomeSite, which is a Windows package, it's very popular. HTML-Kit, another Windows program with a .NET version that's supposed to run perfectly well under Mono. These are tools that know about HTML tags, know about the rules, but you're essentially editing them as in the raw. It gives you the control, but you have the help. So, I can't quite remember how such and such works. these are buttons to say, oh, put a list in. But they show you the list that they've created. They don't create a graphical list and then mess it all up horribly. Tools like Kate, Emacs, GVim, Eclipse, there's lots and lots of standard editing tools and editing suites that have plugins for web pages, for CSS, for PHP, Perl, all the different things you could possibly want to support. But they're not specifically written themselves as web editing tools. You can use a text editor. I know someone who's quite happy to create all his web pages in Vi. There's nothing wrong with it. If you know the commands, you remember the HTML, you just write it. Graphics, obviously you've got GIMP and Inkscape for creating bitmaps and SVGs. I try and avoid graphics because they're difficult to get right, but I'm quite happy to stick a photograph. Photoshop is obviously the de rigueur commercial product, but of course it's not available on Linux. So how do you go about creating the famous Hello World example? Well, you install Apache if it's not there already. There's two versions at the moment, 1.3 and 2. I would say go with 2. It doesn't really make any difference. If you get an option, version 2 comes with lots of different models of running. Pre-fork is the simplest to understand. It's the way that 1.3 behaved, and that's the one I go for. But there are lots of sophisticated threading and hybrid models and things to choose from, but it's not worth bothering about. Pick a text editor or a non-WYSIWYG editor. Anyone will do. HTML doesn't care, it's not picky. Create a file and save it to your computer. And then point your browser at your computer. So here we go. An incredibly simple example. A bit of HTML. Any text editor can create that. Just type it. It says hello world. Everything has to say hello world for the first one. And then you browse to 127.0.0.1, local host. You're not going anywhere fast, then you're not connected to the internet. And you'll see something like this, Apache, whatever version you installed. It may or may not have your operating system. Obviously it's port 80 on your computer. There's a file that you've just created. And you sort of click on the underlining bit just like you would normal. And you get a web page. That's all there is to HTML. Obviously it looks better in a browser. So all you have to do now is learn the rules of HTML, CSS and JavaScript, and you can make sophisticated web pages. Web pages are made from a language called XHTML, Extensible Hypertext Markup Language. It doesn't actually have many elements to it. It's actually conceptually very simple. It's much simpler than using something like Microsoft Word. There are only, I think, under 100 commands or options, essentially. It's not that difficult. You can hold most of it in your head. You create the structure of your document with XHTML. You then make them pretty or attractive or colourful or whatever you fancy using CSS, cascading style sheets. Don't try and make it pretty in the XHTML. That's the way things used to be done in the last century, and it's really bad, and it hurts when you try and change things 6 months, a year later. You can make them interactive and fancy and do all sorts of interactive things in the browser using ECMAScript 262, which most people know as JavaScript, but it's officially a standard, ECMAScript 262. That's a nice little programming language which is mostly abused, like Flash. You can do really cute things, you can write really nice safe code that doesn't interfere with people's web experience, but it's very easy to make really horrid things with it. You can add pictures with JPEGs, PNGs or GIFs. PNGs are really nice if you're running on something like Firefox. They've got alpha transparency, you can do beautiful effects. It doesn't work on IE, so most people don't use them yet, which is a horrid, horrid shame. The W3...
Just say PNGs are not encumbered by any of the patents or other crap that JPEGs and GIFs are.
Yes, they're designed to be unencumbered. And they're very nice technology, very underused. It's just a horrid, horrid shame. The World Wide Web Consortium, based in Massachusetts, writes the rules for XHTML, CSS. I think they did ping, how browsers are supposed to communicate with servers, and a whole bunch of other rules. And they have committees made up of people from all sorts of companies, and they try and write sensible rules and publish them on their website. It's very dry, very dull, but it is the reference. And obviously, there's lots and lots of books and lots of websites explaining what to do. So I put this on because of the dates, and the dates are important. XHTML is from 2001. There is no reason to use HTML version 2 or HTML version 3. They're so long ago, it's a joke. It's just insanity. But people still complain, oh, XHTML, it's too modern. It's not too modern. CSS, it's from the last century. It's that old. There's no reason to not be using modern standards. Web accessibility, something everyone ignores, but it's very, very important. It's actually the law in the United Kingdom. It's very grey and difficult to interpret exactly what the law says, but if you provide goods and services, you are supposed to make a stab at making it accessible, be that ramps on your door, but it also applies to your website. The RNIB, I believe, have not won a court case yet because everyone's settled out of court. But it's a very grey area, but the general interpretation is you're supposed to make your website accessible if you're providing goods and services. A spin-off from accessibility is accessible websites tend to get indexed by people like Google very, very well, very, very quickly. Google is blind and sees a website like a blind person. You can get to the top of Google ranking in about 2 weeks if with a well-constructed web page. Very easily. And then you've got the scripting language. Again, it's old, it's well established. There's no reason to use the old version or any of the evil hacks that people used to use to make things work in IE3 and Netscape 3 and Opera 4. It's just silliness. This is long gone. No reason to worry about things like this. So why should you use the standards? Most people say, oh, I don't need to worry about standards. I'm going to make my website for IE6. Well, IE7 fixes lots of really nasty bugs in IE6, so your web pages won't work anymore. And you'll be very unhappy because you'll have to rewrite them all. But they won't work in IE6 either because you'll be hacking them for IE7, which is different from 6. And they won't work in Firefox or Opera anyway. If you stick to the standards, the browsers try and render things the same way. It's not perfect, but it should get you a better, more predictable results. Your web pages will break in the same way everywhere, or they will work in the same way everywhere. So that's the first reason. If you write clean, modern XHTML with style sheets, your web page can be half or a quarter of the size of a typical web page created by Dreamweaver. Easily. If you're someone like Google or Yahoo who pays for your internet connection by the byte, that's very important. If you're somebody like Amazon who makes their money by selling things, having disgruntled customers is bad. If their website takes too long to render because it's so big, it takes forever to get across the internet, and then it takes 5 minutes for the browser to reassemble this enormously complicated page, when all you want to do is hit the buy button, that's bad. So there's a lot to be said for standards. You get more predictable behavior, and the web pages should be smaller. The third point, which no one ever believes, but I assure you it's true, is in 6 months' time, when you're scratching your head trying to wind out why this little picture of something or other is in the wrong place, if you've written to the standards and your web pages are structured neatly, you can understand how they work. You would not believe how horrible and miserable it is to be given a web page that someone wrote a year ago in Dreamweaver, and it looks perfect then, but they need to add something. Just one little tiny thing. The pain you will go through is unbelievable. In fact, to get it to work, I believe it's called the IE effect. Because getting that last couple of percent to perfection is very, very difficult, especially on a legacy page. It really is horrid. And the accessibility issue, well, it is actually the law, although it's not very well explained, but you are supposed to do it. So there are some additional tools that can help. If you're running something like Firefox, there's a couple of plugins that are really, 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 really nice. Web Developer and Firebug. Web Developer will allow you to tamper with just about any element of the CSS using the page, find out what that particular thing there is, which element in the HTML it is. You can dismantle the page, find out how the forms work, all interactive while you're running the web page in the browser as it's being rendered to you. Firebug will find any bug in the CSS, the JavaScript, or the HTML. It can debug all sorts of complicated things. Both of these are fantastic tools if you can't understand why that button isn't highlighting the way you thought it should be. And one of the most useful tools of all is just viewing the source. It's simple. You look at a web page, see how it's constructed. It's a very easy way of learning. Unfortunately, it's a very easy way of learning bad, but you can see the source. Every web page you can see the source of. Every CSS style sheet you can see the source of. Validators are very, very helpful. There's online ones and built into editor tools. CSS can break if the page is invalid. Some people say, I don't need to worry about validity. That's just some stuffy academic thing. Some browsers, Firefox, Opera in particular, can be very picky. If the web page isn't correct, it looks right, but nothing fits together. The things don't line up properly. You can't get that green thing over there, and this thing that's blue isn't. If the page is valid, it's a good way of eliminating the possibility of errors in your HTML. Errors in HTML will cause CSS to break. So if you validate them, you know there's no errors. So anything left isn't an actual error in the HTML. It's you've just put something in the wrong place or nested something incorrectly. But it is worth doing, and it will cut down on problems. So HTML, XHTML, is a form of XML. So all you need to do is you create your tags. Everyone calls them tags. You have little angle brackets and a word. All tags are closed. So if you start with a tag, you have something in it, or as this case example, not, and you have a closed tag. Even if there's nothing in it, it must be closed. That's what XML said. And they must be logically nested. Strong, span, correct. Span, strong. You can't go strong, span, strong, span. It's got to be logically nested. It's very simple. They decided when HTML originally wasn't case sensitive, so that was valid HTML. It's not valid XHTML. That is different from that, because XML is case sensitive. So they picked a case and they picked lowercase. Some people like uppercase, some people like lower. With XHTML you don't have a choice. It must be lowercase. And everything must be quoted. You can use double quotes or single quotes, but unquoted, it's very common in things that like Dreamweaver and Front Page will do, or misquoted. This is bad. Don't do it. So all you have to do to learn XHTML is, it is XML, and the rules for XML are very, very simple. There's a list of the tags. You can look them up on the W3's website. Most of the books will have them in the appendices. You just flick through, it's a simple list. And there's a list of permitted nestings. You can only put certain tags in certain places. It's fixed. It's either it's correct or it's not. There's no ambiguity anymore. And documents must validate. So here is a minimal HTML document, which isn't actually that minimal, but the first line tells it where the reference is, the DTD. This says, I'm an XML document, and this DTD here tells you what tags I can have and where they can be arranged. If you include that, browsers like Firefox and IE say, aha, this person's writing in XHTML. I am going to do my best to render this page correctly. If you don't include that, they say, aha, I'm going to do what my designers thought, which is nothing to do with the standard. And they go off into what's called quirks mode. And IE6 and IE5 and IE7 and Netscape and Mozilla all do different things in quirks mode. It's absolutely horrendous. All sorts of weird, illogical things happen in quirks mode. So it's worth always putting that in, so that then they do their best to stick to the standards. Root node is HTML. Don't worry about the other bits at the moment. I have a header section, yes, that's my end head. And there are various things permitted in the head. I've told it to use a style sheet, which is in the next pet style. I've given it a shortcut icon, the little teensy-weensy picture you can never understand what it is that appears at the top of your web page. You can specify that. There's a whole bunch of search engine things here. Google ignores them, but most of the things don't. But you'll see lots of web pages, and some people will have headings which have got whole, entire works of Shakespeare in here, because they're trying to get high rankings. The robots index follow just simply tells any search robot, yes, you can look at this page, and you can follow any links in it. They do that usually by default, but it's worth included. Title. I have a title. It appears at the top of the page. Google really, really, really cares what your title is. It makes a big difference. Many companies will put stupid titles in there. Classic one is welcome to. Well, lots of places are called welcome to. You need to put the name first. IBM is much more important than welcome. It seems illogical, and when you read it in English, but the search engine waits the start of the sentence. And the most important thing in welcome to IBM is IBM. It's not welcome. So we have body. This is where the bits, everything below within the body, where's the body, is the bit that you actually see inside the frame of the browser. You have comments. This is an old HTML, XML construct. So you can put comments anywhere you want. Browser doesn't show them. Obviously, if you look at the source, you can see what they are. So never put anything in comments like, "Ooh, this bit doesn't work here. If you do something, it'll break," because anyone can read that. Divs are boxes. They don't do anything. They just define a square. Use style to control their appearance. Here we have a list. UL, unordered list. You just have to learn anything. LI, list element, or list item. Two things I've highlighted in green here are ID. An ID is a unique pointing a page. So I'm saying this is the top navigation. There's only one top navigation. There it is uniquely. I can access that using all sorts of scripting tools later on, or using the style sheet. Give it a specific color. Class is a generic thing. I could have several things called home. Actually, in this example, I've just got home, break, and no hit. Lots of things can have a class. I'm not using anything here that says, oh, this is a certain font, this is a certain size, this is a certain position. That's not what you're supposed to put in XHTML. I'm putting, this is a box, this is a list, these are list items. This one is class home, this one is class break, this one is class no hit. I'm defining them as classes. So here we have a bit of content inside another div. Heading, H1 is the biggest heading, H2, secondary heading, H3, tertiary, and so on down to there's actually 6 headings. They have to come in that order, by the way. You're not supposed to put H2 ahead of a H1. That's naughty. Because obviously a first heading comes first. Google really, really likes headings, and it's really, really important that you have the correct headings correctly nested, because Google thinks they're important because headings are important. I'm sure anyone's English teacher would tell you to write your headings and double underline them in the centre of the page because it's important. Many people fiddle with the headings for stylistic reasons, and it's silly because now you're saying the top of my page is a heading level 6, which is this itsy little tiny font. It's not correct. P for paragraph. A href creates a link to another HTML page. Body end of body HTML. So all you have to do to create a web page is learn all the tags, and that's just technique. There's no point in me listing every single tag here because I'm not going to do that because it's pointless. They're in books, they're in websites. You just have to learn them. But most of them are fairly straightforward. P for a paragraph. Div creates a division. BR creates a break. What else is there that's pretty good? Strong, well, it's strong. EM for emphasis. And there's some old ones like I for italics and B for bold. You're not supposed to use them because they imply something, whereas bold obviously means bold, but strong means it's stronger. It doesn't actually have any specific meaning, which is where the style sheet comes on. It doesn't look like HTML at all. What we're saying here is the tag called body, give it these properties. So we have a bunch of properties there. Background color. BC, can't remember what color that is. Mucky light color. The font color is black. The font family is Deja Vu Sans. Or, if you haven't got that, try Verdana. Or, if you haven't got that, Arial. Or Helvetica, and if you haven't got any of them, use whatever your default sans serif font is. I'm saying the font size should be 13 pixels. There's no padding and there's no margin. And there's a whole list of possible things you can apply. Style sheets, it's important to cascade them. Everything is pretty much underneath the body. So everything in this page will now have those properties unless I explicitly give them something else. So all the A tags have all these properties, plus if it's an A with an image in it, it has no border, which actually in this case, yes, I've not explicitly stated a border. Images, if you remember, have a blue border. That's their default property. So I'm turning it off. If you want to group multiple things together, you can go H1, H2, H3, H5, H6, and I'm shifting them into a serif font. So the headings are now in a different font from the rest of the page. Everything else will be Deja Vu, Sans, Verdana, Arial, whatever you've got, except for the headings, because they've now been told to use a different font. Except for the heading ones have a border at the bottom. All the rest of the headings will be identical. So if you have a group of things, you can define most of their properties together, and then later on, a later rule will explicitly change any setting in here. So here we have a margin of 5 and 10 pixels, and here I'm saying actually for H1s, they're all 10 pixels. So this rule is later than that rule. So it takes precedence. Dot footer is a class. So those things that were classes, anything which I now say is class dot footer will be text aligned right and have a top margin of 40 pixels. And you can have multiple classes for the same object. So it can have class right important, and it will combine the two rules. A : link. This is an unusual one because the A's have functions like hover. So you can color code your A tags such that when you hover over them they go a different color, they change shape different. Mozilla, and I'm not sure if IE7 allows you to do that to actually every other tag on the page. It's a very easy way of building navigation structures with CSS without having to use any coding at all. But it doesn't work in IE6. And this here is an ID. So the top nav is always, because it's a unique element, has these properties. And the rules within here are straightforward. The later in the rule, in the style sheet, that's the last rule, it's the one that applies. Rules cascade down, so everything underneath body inherits these properties and anything specific. And if you have a rule which is more specific than a general rule, the specific rule wins. So the cascading style sheet strategy is not to say P's look like this, divs look like this, list items look like this. You cascade from the body looks like this, everything inherits. I want to make my emphasis is italicized, and I want to use Comic Sans font. So you apply, the style sheet should be, this is the default, everything else is the exception. If you use something like Dreamweaver, it will try and create every single rule as an exception, and it will produce an enormous style sheet. It's gigantic, and it's very difficult to understand what's going on. So, because it's well defined and it's well known, you can just go and get the two basic books. You can get the XHTML reference book and the CSS reference book. This one's written by Eric Meyer, who's very good. He really, really knows style sheet, and he produces some very fancy websites for lots of people that I don't necessarily claim to understand. The HTML, the definitive guide, is basically a list of every tag, how you're supposed to use it, what you're supposed to be used, and simple examples. This is, in essence, learnable just by rote. You can memorize it. This book, Web Design in a Nutshell, is a nice book that covers all the different pieces. AOL, for many, many years, recompressed JPEGs and GIFs. So if you created a web page with a GIF in it and a JPEG and wondered why your friend on AOL said it looked rubbish, it was because AOL actually recompressed it for you. And it includes lots of little knickknacks and little tidbits of information. It covers all sorts of techniques, how to create graphics, how to load graphics, how to create animation, a little bit of JavaScript, how to use FTP. If you're running on a Windows platform and you go into a Unix platform, you know, some people have to fiddle around with the line endings. It's a snapshot of everything. It's a very nice little book. Now, the web pages. Jacob Nielsen writes useit.com. The later columns are a bit specific, but the earlier things are very straightforward. Web pages must load and render in 10 seconds. IBM studied computers and people in the 60s, and they found that if you sit someone down with a computer and they press buttons and nothing happens, after about 10 seconds most people start pressing more buttons. It's normal human behavior. So web pages must load quickly. And this website is hated by web designers the world over because he says it's important to do things for the customer. And people like to do things because it's fun, it's creative. But he says at the end of the day, the customer is the one paying the bill. One of my favourite examples was a scuba diving shop found no one could buy anything. And he looked at the website and said, "What's this?" in the corner. And said, "Oh, that's my fishing basket." Because obviously when you've put things in, you put them into your fishing basket. Because you're scuba diving and you put them in a little net. No one recognised it as a net because everyone was looking for a trolley or a basket. Because everyone else had used a trolley and a basket. And the designer thought he was being cool, but the customers had no idea what the little fishing net was supposed to be. So I've seen him say very horrid things about Flash when the managing director of Macromedia was on stage next to him, and everyone laughed. But he's a very clever guy. It's a very good website, but the older articles are much more interesting. The newer ones are now so specific because he's done all the obvious things already. Lots of people use W3 Schools. I haven't used it recently, but I'm told it's it's actually quite good now. In the past it had a reputation for being a bit fast and loose with the specifications. A List Apart is a nice web design site with some really cool tricks, and the guy who runs this has written a number of books, very nice books where he's very strongly advocating design by standards, and he's also very artistic, so you get a very nice presentation as well. So it's quite nice website, some very clever tricks. And the CSS Zen Garden, I wouldn't expect anyone to understand that because I don't, but it's a very nice example of here is one web page which is completely different just using style sheets. And it's worth going to see because you'll see a web page and it's got some text, and then you have a bunch of options to press, and you click the option and the page will completely redesign itself. But it's the same web page. The web page never changes, it's just a style sheet. That's to show you the power that can be achieved by separating your look and feel from the actual code. It's a very, very impressive website. It's probably totally impractical, but it's very nice to look at. The last two websites are mostly important if you care about Internet Explorer, because Internet Explorer unfortunately is riddled with bugs, and IE7 has a different set. And if you have to support Internet Explorer, which if you are supporting a website in a corporate environment you have to support, you have to go there because Microsoft says do this and it'll work, and well, they're lying. It doesn't. The bugs are well known, well documented, and there's a great big enormous long list of them there. Very powerful websites for this little teensy weensy snippet will fix this little annoying behavior, and this is how you do it. And you have to know that, otherwise you will pull your hair out, assuming you had any to start with, that is. Alright, so a bunch of my websites, in case anyone has any sudden urge to go and look at them. Overton Biodiversity site, it's just a small community site. Some nice chappie in the lug provided a server for us at a very reasonable rate. And that's a very simple, this is an activity that we do, these are our pictures, this is what we did last weekend. You know, there's a picture of me digging through goodness knows how many tons of flints in a field, and pictures of brown trout in the River Test and all sorts of other things. So it's a simple sort of community flat web page website. East Court School, very unusual. It's a school for people with dyslexia, and they were very organised. They said, here you are, this is what we want to appear on the website, a bunch of text files, here's a stack of photographs, you design as a website. It was fantastic. They had written all their prose. Prose is the most important thing. The actual content is the hard bit. As a designer, you can't make up the content. You know, they have to provide that. Most companies are terrible at saying, build us a website, without providing any content. So they were very, very nice. And these two are my sites. That one's a hosted one somewhere in the States, and that's running off my server at home. And just to prove you can actually do it. But I think it gets 3 or 4 SSH scans per day. So don't connect a machine to the internet and allow incoming traffic unless you're confident that you can keep unwanted incoming traffic out. It really does happen.